Thank you very much for attending my lecture recital today. My name is Audis, and welcome to my presentation called Bel Canto Posaune, a case for bel canto technique. That opening piece was Dave Taylor's Double Tier, which is an original interpretation of Franz Schubert's Der Doppelgänger, originally written for tenor voice and piano. The purpose of this presentation is to establish the importance of studying bel canto technique at a personal level through lessons provided by a bel canto pedagogue. By taking bel canto lessons, trombonists can establish a more natural physical approach to the trombone and develop a strong sense of musical line. Give me 1 second while I transition into the presentation. Contemporary trombone pedagogy teaches us that the ability to conceptualize a vocal approach to trombone playing is essential. The trombone has shared a long history with the voice, including but not limited to the use of vocalization as a practice tool, the appropriation of bel canto vocalises as practice material for the trombone, and the amount of vocal material written or arranged for trombone choir. Highly esteemed brass pedagogues, such as Arnold Jacobs and Emery Remington, encouraged and pioneered incorporating a vocal approach to the fundamentals of trombone playing. Mr. Jacobs, a phenomenal tubist, who is also considered to be one of the greatest brass pedagogues of the 20th century, always recommended including lyrical bel canto style to everyday routines. His favorites were among the Conconi and Bordoni collections, which today are still the two most popular collections still being published. Mr. Remington, considered to be one of the greatest trombone pedagogues of all time, would sing during his students' lessons and rarely picked up the horn to demonstrate musical examples. Clearly establishing a conceptualized bel canto approach to trombone playing is a bedrock in the foundation of trombone pedagogy. But is there a physical connection between trombone playing and singing that can help to develop a more authentic and natural approach to trombone? First, let's establish what bel canto means. Bel canto is an Italian term for beautiful singing, which refers to an approach to the voice that promotes the natural alignment of the muscles and tissues involved in the process of phonation, as well as musical line above all else. Bel canto technique was developed to train vocalists to be able to perform operatic works while maintaining vocal health. The term bel canto was first coined during the mid-19th century to describe the audible differences between operatic singers and other vocalists. In essence, bel canto technique places the importance of airflow and musical line above all else. Musical line refers to the connection of notes throughout the entirety of a phrase, with the vocalist gliding through musical gestures, deploying a constant vibrato with a liberal amount of portamento. This is, of course, only possible when the airflow is efficiently used. Concerning language, diction should never be allowed to dictate the musical line. The connection of musical line is more important than the clarity of the words. This is not to say that diction is not important, but that diction is not the driving factor in bel canto technique. If a singer does place too much emphasis on diction, then they are referred to as diction singers. By placing too much emphasis on diction, the musical line becomes disjointed, which causes a lack of musicality and greatly hinders the ability to portray emotions in the voice. Just like too much of an emphasis on diction can destroy a vocalist's sense of musical line, trombonists who place too much of an emphasis on the tongue can disrupt their own musicality. Once the importance of musical line has been established, bel canto vocalists begin to develop a natural approach to their voice. A natural approach is accomplished by establishing a physical alignment of the muscles and tissues required for phonation, with optimal resonance being the central objective. First, vocalists must learn to establish an even sound between the head register and the chest register. The head register refers to the vocal range in which the singer experiences the sensation of vibration in their nasal cavity, while the chest voice is when the sensation of vibration is in the thoracic cavity, otherwise known as the chest. The transition notes between the two voices registers are known as Posaune passages and must be treated delicately. Through vowel modification, which is the act of allowing for a vowel to take on some of the characteristics of closely related vowels, vocalists learn to develop evenness between the registers. Now let's take a closer look at what inner physical components are vital for phonation. The vocal tract, as described in What Every Singer Needs to Know About the Body, written by Melissa Mauld and et al., consists of the head, the throat and related muscles, the jaw, the tongue, the soft palate, the cheek muscles, the lips, the epiglottic sphincter, which is the opening of the throat leading into the laryngeal space, and the laryngeal space itself. Notice that not every component of the vocal tract has a direct role in the act of phonation. The vocal tract also accounts for those which play a role in resonance. If any of these components are underperformed or overactivated, otherwise known as hypo or hyperfunctioning, the ability to project the voice becomes severely limited. It should be noted that bel canto technique informs us that one critical element that is missing from the description of the vocal tract is the airflow. Not only does the breath drive musical line, but if the breath is underperforming, then the other components of the vocal tract will be forced to hyperfunction due to the lack of support. While some of this material is directly related to trombone playing, the approach to the individual components is quite different. Notice how vocal pedagogues have incorporated all these components into one system. By describing the process of phonation and resonance as a tract or system, vocalists are taught to conceptualize the act of singing as one bodily function, much like the digestive or respiratory system. There is only one known written case found in trombone pedagogy that can be considered a trombone equivalent to the vocal tract, and that is the description of an embouchure team. The concept of an embouchure team was established in What Every Trombonist Needs to Know About the Body, written by David Vining. It describes the embouchure team as consisting of the facial muscles, the lips, the tongue, the jaw, and the lungs/airflow. The embouchure team is the concept that each of these individual components plays a role in establishing a healthy embouchure. Traditionally, trombone pedagogy treats each component as a separate device, though. For instance, when trombonists discuss the embouchure, they are typically referring to the lips and fail to account or take into account the role of the facial muscles concerning the manipulation of the lips. The tongue is usually only discussed concerning its role as an articulator. It is easy to overlook its ability to impede vibration and create issues that go well beyond articulation. The role of the jaw is usually only briefly discussed, with most of the discussion concerning the size of the space between the skull and the jaw. And finally, lungs and airflow tend to be the first victim of band instructors and trombone pedagogues alike. Hoping to encourage their students to take in the required amount of air for trombone playing, many metaphors have been established to describe the function of the lungs. Unfortunately, most of the metaphors used create breathing concepts that are anatomically incorrect and can cause a student to physically manipulate their breathing in an unnatural manner. If Mr. Vining's description of the embouchure tract as a single system is not the first by trombone pedagogues, it is one of the very few. With modern technology advances, especially concerning MRI video capabilities, I believe that Mr. Vining's embouchure team should be redefined in order to incorporate the throat, specifically concerning the glottis and the soft palate. With the addition of the throat, I propose that we also adopt vocal terminology and refer to the group of muscles, tissues, and organs involved in trombone playing as the embouchure tract. To further establish the physical correlation between trombone playing and singing, let's explore what has recently been discovered concerning the inner workings of brass playing. The MRI Brass Repository Project is a collaboration between three major contributors and their associates. They are Dr. Peter Iltis, professor of kinesiology at Gordon College of Massachusetts, Dr. Jens Fromm, director of biomedical NMR research at the Max Planck Institute for Biophysical Chemistry in Göttingen, Germany, and Dr. Eckhard Altemuller, director of the Institute for Music Physiology and Musicians Medicine in Hanover, Germany. The MRI Brass Repository was formed in order to study the physical anomalies between healthy elite horn players and those who suffer from embouchure dystonia by using MRI video capability technology. During their research, many revelations were made concerning the inner physical movements of brass players. The following videos have been provided by Mr. Douglas Yo and consists of his time spent in an MRI machine. These videos provide visual proof of the inner physiological workings of the trombone and help to establish a connection between the inner workings of a vocalist and trombonist. This first video allows us to see Mr. Yo's tongue position while he navigates from the low to the high tessitures of the horn. You will notice how when he performs low notes, his tongue is in a relatively low position within the oral cavity. Once he begins to reach the high notes, his tongue takes up a larger percentage of the oral cavity. Let us view. I'm sorry about that. I was just informed that you guys could not hear the video. Let's please play part of it again.
Writing's not that easy, but Grammarly can help. This sentence is...
As you probably noticed, the way Mr. Yo's tongue moves to accommodate range is actually reminiscent of how the tongue moves when performing pure vowels found in the Italian language. Specifically, ah, for the low notes, E for the mid range, and E for the high notes. This second video demonstrates how Mr. Yo's soft palate becomes elevated to allow for constant airflow. If the soft palate is left drooping during trombone playing, not only will airflow become more constricted, but a portion of the air will dissipate into the nasal cavity and possibly cause damage to the soft palate. As you notice, Mr. Yo raises his soft palate while playing, and right here, during an inhale, the soft palate is drooping. The third video, which may be the most controversial of the three, demonstrates the role of the glottis concerning dynamic control. You will notice that Mr. Yo's glottis, which is located in the middle of the video, drastically shrinks during when he's playing the quiet dynamics, but then increases in size as he's crescendoing through the long tone. His glottis also remains fully open during the inhale. While some may argue that the evidence only demonstrates Mr. Yo's individual approach to trombone playing, the researchers noted that the same physiological elements were found in other brass players, specifically healthy elite players. Unfortunately, the players that were observed who did not closely align to this physiological approach, both with the tongue, the soft palate, and also the glottis, they tended to suffer from embouchure dystonia. Let's look at some of the still images from these videos. Again, notice how the tongue is in a low position within the oral cavity, right here, while performing a low note. During the high note, Mr. Yo's tongue fills up most of the oral cavity, causing the airflow to move faster and aid the rest of the embouchure tract in reaching the high tessitura of the trombone. Right here. When we look at the position of the soft palate, notice that Mr. Yo's soft palate is elevated in the same position as Mr. Volley. Now, Mr. Volley is a Germanic operatic baritone, which shows that the soft palate has to be raised both for bel canto opera singers as well as trombone players. By raising the soft palate, this allows for a constant resonance and airflow chamber. And finally, we can actually see in great detail the different shapes that the glottis takes depending on the dynamic level. This bat wing shaped sort of spot right here is the glottis. And at the inhale, when it's at its most relaxed, it's fully open. During the quiet dynamics, we were able to actually pull a frame from Mr. Yo's video where it showed how drastically smaller it is than when inhaling. Of course, it is still unimpeded and there's still a airflow freely allowed to go through. There's no half closure of the vocal folds, but the glottis is still quite a bit smaller. And then finally, during the loud dynamics, it opens back up to almost where it was at the inhalation. The last bel canto technique we will explore is the fundamental necessity of establishing a proper and healthy onset. There are three major onset types: the soft onset, the heart attack, and the balanced onset. Bel canto technique requires an in depth understanding of onset and is taught not only to establish a correct fundamental onset, but the ability to skillfully play with the onset for emotional and linguistical purposes. The soft onset happens when the vocal folds fail to complete a seal while phonating, creating a leakage of air. Due to the overabundance of non phonating air in the tone, a vocalist who suffers from a soft onset will be described as having an airy voice. The trombone direct equivalent of a soft onset would be the failure to form a complete seal between the lips and the mouthpiece. But on the physical side, while trombonists never want to play with the glottis partially closed, if the glottis fails to fully open, then the tone and quality of resonance will also suffer greatly. The heart attack happens when the vocal muscles become active too early, closing the vocal folds before the act of phonation. When the vocal folds are closed, the exhalation will force the vocal folds to open, creating an explosive sound with an audible grunt. Instead of being referred to as a type of onset, it is referred to as an attack because of the percussive sound and physical injuries it can cause. When the vocal folds are victim of overpressurization, they can develop calluses and cysts that have a long-lasting impact on their ability to phonate properly. In extreme cases, it is common for surgery to be required. For trombonists, this same phenomenon is referred to as the Valsalva maneuver. The pressurization of the airflow before vibration can create issues for trombonists, causing delayed or uncoordinated responses, a lack of flexibility, and a tone that fails to be vibrant. The balance onset, which is the onset that bel canto vocalists strive for, is manifested through allowing proper airflow to freely drive phonation and not through micromanaging the vocal folds or airflows. This is accomplished through different vocal exercises. Unfortunately, the concept of onset is rarely discussed in trombone pedagogy. Establishing a proper and healthy onset for the trombone by using specific vocal exercises designed to develop a balanced onset for vocalists can alleviate most of the issues related to the act of phonation/vibration. It also promotes clarity and a quick response on trombone. To finish up the technical connections between bel canto singing and trombone playing, let's take a quick look at some possible exercises trombonists can take from bel canto pedagogy. In this first exercise, this will help trombonists to develop a visual connection between the tessitura being played and the required vowel shape. The tongue will need to develop smooth transitions between the ranges, i.e. through vowel modification, but this will be dependent on the person's physiological anomalies. The second set of exercises can help to establish a balanced onset on the trombone. Although these exercises should be played at a time, there needs to be note consistency for each exercise. Be sure to take full unencumbered breaths when practicing these exercises. For exercises 1 and 2, the tongue should not be involved during vibration. For exercises 3 and 5, the tongue should also not be involved. So in order to establish the sensation of a tongueless onset. Once this has been established, the tongueless onset should then serve as a role model for the tongue onset, which is what would be applied for exercises 5 and 6. And finally, this last set of exercises may help to relieve the Valsalva maneuver or issues concerning a tight throat. The trombonist should first sing each exercise in a comfortable vocal range. Although each note should be individually defined, there should also be a connection throughout the entirety of the phrase. By placing an H consonant before the ah vowel, the glottis is forced to be open during phonation. Once this exercise has been vocalized, it should be repeated on trombone in the same manner. The goal is to establish the same sensation between the trombone and the voice, with the hope of removing any wanted glottal pressure. Future exploration should be done concerning vocal exercises and their ability to relieve issues that plague trombonists. We may be able to discover new ways to prevent or relieve issues concerning the Valsalva maneuver, velopharyngeal insufficiency, which is when the soft palate fails to elevate and is damaged by interpressurization of the oral cavity, and as well as throat tension in general. Now that we have explored the benefits that bel canto technique can provide on the technical/fundamental level, let's explore how bel canto lessons can improve a trombonist's musicality. As mentioned in the introduction, bel canto vocalises are a staple in trombone pedagogy. After studying bel canto technique, I have come to the conclusion, though, that some of the supposed benefits that have been attributed to vocalises fail to manifest in young students. Vocalises are not the most efficient way to establish a vocal approach to the trombone or in developing a sense of musical line, simply because that's not what they are designed for. Vocalises, at least the vocalises used by trombonists, are designed for bel canto vocalists who have already established a proficiency in the fundamentals and who have already developed an approach that emphasizes musical line. Vocalises, like Berdoni and Cocconi, require a mature sense of musical exploration to be beneficial. Due to the lack of text, both phrasing and emotional context are not concrete. This is beneficial for advanced vocal students or even advanced trombone students, but young students may find that they are more concerned with playing each note than exploring musical opportunities. I suggest that before prescribing vocalese collections, trombone pedagogues should encourage their students to practice and perform opera arias. By studying arias, trombonists can use vocal resources that provide concrete information, including the emotional context and phrasing, which is provided by the text, well-known melodies that can also be used to further develop ear training, and arguably the most important aspect, by requiring trombone students to study arias, they are forced into researching different opera singers and a wide plethora of approach to the same piece. Unlike vocalises, it is incredibly easy to find vocal recordings of major arias. This also ensures that trombonists begin to listen to elite singers and develop a sense of what high-quality singing sounds like. The musical portion of my lecture recital, which is in a record format due to the COVID regulations, represents the benefits of taking bel canto lessons and the impact bel canto technique has on singing and trombone playing. This video also represents the culmination of 2 years of studying bel canto lessons with no other vocal training or performing taking place. Please enjoy. All right. Thank you very much for listening to my musical presentation on bel canto arias for trombone and for voice. In conclusion, privately studying bel canto technique can provide trombonists with a new tool set for establishing a natural and individual approach to the instrument. By taking bel canto lessons, trombonists can develop a strong kinesthetic awareness for the embouchure tract and promote healthy playing. Bel canto technique provides different exercises and approaches that may help trombonists to build the connection between the mental and physical in ways that trombone pedagogy has not thought of. And finally, bel canto lessons can also provide a trombonist with opportunities to perform and study opera arias, developing confidence for musical line and the opportunity for exposure to elite opera vocalists. Thank you very much for attending my presentation. Now, here, real quick, is the bibliography I used for this presentation. And at this point, I am opening up the lines, I guess you could say, for any sort of questions.
Please feel like if you'd like to, what questions you'd like to ask, just simply unmute and ask your questions.
I have one for you, Calvin. You talked about the
Sorry,
kind of
I cannot hear.
Oh, can you hear me now? Calvin, can you hear me?
Okay, I can hear you.
You're coming through.
Okay. You talked about like kind of a changing mindset between vocalises and teaching arias. Have you, in your research, come across any expansive collections, whether it's a book or whatnot, of a collection of arias to teach out of?
You know, funny enough, there's nothing, as far as what I've come across, there's nothing really written for trombone specifically. But what's great about studying arias, especially for the cash-strapped minded students, is that for one thing, most of it actually falls under public domain. The 5 out of the 6 pieces I performed actually were under public domain. The only one is the Puccini, which was not yet. So luckily you have the source of IMSLP to grab individual arias. But even what's better that vocalists have that I really wish trombonists had is they actually have these collections lined out already for you. And they have what is a bass book, they have a tenor book, alto, a soprano, and some of the outlying voice types. And these collections, they're usually about $20 to $30, and they will have about 20 arias in it. So, like for instance, that's actually where I got my copies of both the Magic Flute, Queen of the Night, and the Toreador song. So yeah, and to answer your question, unfortunately, there's nothing specifically written for trombone, but we can still easily find it. We just have to look through the vocal catalogs.
So I've got a question. So this may be naive, but can you discuss the concept of octave with regard to bel canto? For example, soprano and alto, passages as well. Would you prepare differently for different voices? And you can certainly, alto might be better to mimic an alto song, but let's say a bass trombonist wanted to do some rep in a higher octave. What would your strategy be there?
Well, actually, for instance, the Magic Flute aria, which I did, I actually played that down what would be considered 2 octaves from where it's written. So there's just potential right there is playing it either in the original voice it was written for, so either working out of a soprano book or even a tenor book. Nessun Dorma goes up to a high B. that's much more than a lot of the repertoire for bass trombone goes. So we have the extreme range right there, and we can just easily appropriate that. But also, kind of an interesting thing to think about is like, I really wish I had the alto chops, because the magic flute would be great for teaching high musical playing for alto trombone. And so, as far as the octave displacement, which I think is what you're really kind of trying to ask here, Doc, is some of the stuff, it can easily be taken down the octave or played as written, depending on what the student is trying to get done.
Well, I was thinking more about the preparation. I mean, for example, if you're doing a light aria, for example, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and you're playing on a bass trombone, would your preparation or thought about how you would approach it be different? Granted, you have to play it several octaves down, but do you think about it as if you're a soprano trying to sing an aria, or would the preparation be different?
I think very much so, in the same sense of like if you're trying to emulate any other instrument. So, like for instance, again, not to rehash on it, but like the Queen of the Night, when I approach it, I very much think you got to approach it light. And there's two reasons: because it's Mozart, but also since it's a coloratura aria, or what's referred to as a coloratura, which is a very high soprano. Those high notes are not meant to be heavy, and if the vocalist ever makes them heavy, then it's actually detrimental to the voice. So I definitely would approach that stuff depending on the voice type, and I would align my thinking and my conceptualization to that. So if we look at Toreador, I specifically read Toreador down an octave, because I found that if I read it at the octave it was originally written, it doesn't get that sort of same rich timbre that you get from a baritone singer. And so, in order to emulate that sort of like richness, I read it down the octave. That actually also went as well for the King Ariosos, or sorry, King René's Arioso by Tchaikovsky. That's written for a Russian bass. Well, I played that down the octave as well, because if you play it in the tessitura that's written, then it fails to have that same oomph power, I guess you can say, that you attribute to the lower vocal ranges.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Anything
Uh,
else? Please feel
oh,
free to ask.
yes, Lisette.
Hi, I have a question about the extension of such a pedagogy. Have you thought about, for beginning trombone students, incorporating perhaps some of the books like 24 Italian art songs for medium high and medium low, which don't have the same kind of vocal demands that, say, an opera aria would for a beginning trombone player, and then they have a little bit more relaxed requirements that would be something to adapt for a beginning trombonist?
Yeah, I have actually thought about that, and the only reason I left it out of the presentation is just simply because art songs, they don't have the bel canto name in front of them. Not
Mm-hmm.
saying you would not sing them with the bel canto style, but I wanted to make sure there was no confusion or overlap there. I actually do
Yeah.
believe that starting with the art songs is a great idea for two reasons. Because when we want to develop musicality in trombonists specifically, going slower is better than throwing a bunch of technical stuff at them. And that's exactly kind of meeting what you're talking about, an easier thing to approach. But also, it's very common that I didn't touch enough on in this presentation, is that it's very common to have trombone players to sing their solos and then try to replicate that with the instrument. Well, the problem is that singing is not as easy as we like to think it is. And by studying stuff like art songs, it allows you to also kind of take it easy on your voice and establish what is natural singing, and make sure that if there's any sort of strain or something that is present in the voice, it doesn't, or at least if there's any sort of risk, take away the risk of causing strain in the voice or tension, in order to make sure that that said strain or tension does not incorporate itself into trombone playing, if you will. So yes, I have thought about art songs, and the only reason we talk specifically about bel canto arias is because the the topic, the thesis, if you will, it's just geared specifically towards bel canto technique. All right, are there any other questions? All right, then finally, before I let you guys go, I would like to acknowledge my committee members, Dr. Kevin Wass, Professor James T. Decker, and Gerard Dolter. I would like to also acknowledge Mrs. Susan Wass for being my very understanding and patient accompanist during this lecture recital. My family, and especially my beautiful wife, Misha, for being a vocal resource and source of inspiration, and Dr. Isoda and his team for their technological assistance in putting this presentation together, especially the amount of time they dedicated to the recording process. So thank you very much for attending.
Thank you so much, Calvin. Bravo.
All right, thank you, and everybody have a good day.
Thank you, Calvin. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Thank you, Calvin. You too.